Well, let's bring in a research professor at the University of Johannesburg, Stephen Friedman. Prof, good morning to you and welcome. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a year since the latest brutal and historical milestone relating to Israel and the Palestinians unfolding on October the 7th. There are stark differences in the characterization of what led to that attack by Hamas on Israel and the subsequent retaliation Israel has inflicted on Gaza and the West Bank. And it depends on whether you ask a Zionist, a Jew or a Palestinian. How would you encapsulate what triggered October the 7th and the months of death and destruction that have followed?
Yeah, thank you, Iman. Yeah, look, I don't think it necessarily depends on you. Obviously, it does to a certain extent depend on your political view, but the historical record is there for everybody to see. Any attacks on civilians are obviously unacceptable. But the fact of the matter is that what happened on October the 7th, an American history professor put it excellently, and he said, history didn't start on October the 7th. History led to October the 7th. And the history that led to October the 7th is one in which Gaza had been under blockade for 16 years. Nothing got in or out without the approval of the Israeli state, which would decide how much pasta people were allowed and how many beans people were allowed, etc. But more important than that, every single peaceful avenue which Palestinian people had were closed down. They voted in election. The election result was not accepted. They engaged in peaceful protest. They were shot at. They tried to boycott, which is a peaceful way of resisting. The boycotts were banned. Now, clearly, if you put people in what was called repeatedly before October the 7th, the biggest open-air prison in the world, and you don't allow them any peaceful expression, what do you think is going to happen? And that doesn't minimize the tragedy of innocent people losing their lives. But, if you don't understand why things happen in history, then they are going to repeat themselves again and again and again. And this myth that somehow what happened on October the 7th happened out of the blue and peaceful people minding their own business were attacked, etc. I mean, that ignores a very long history in which Palestinian people were denied the basic expression which any human being on the planet is entitled to. And sadly, if you cut off all peaceful avenues, then people are going to turn to violence.
You said there, again, history led to October the 7th, and we've seen in the year that's gone past a series of actions to try and curtail or to hold to account those who have led the airstrikes and the military action to follow. Israel and its leaders face a series of legal threats. Most importantly, we've seen at the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, there are charges ranging from genocide to war crimes and crimes against humanity. And just for our viewers, the genocide case was filed by South Africa last December. The World Court then issued provisional measures in late January, ordering Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent actions that could fall under the Genocide Convention. Then we saw in May Karim Khan, who's the chief prosecutor of the ICC, announcing that he'd filed an application seeking warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Gaza. So, Prof, these legal applications, the findings and calls have not deterred Israel. How would you characterize the myriad attempts made to stop this legally and why it has so far not been able to silence Israel's guns?
Look, Iman, people make the point repeatedly, which is a fair point, that these legal actions haven't stopped the killing. On the other hand, sadly, nothing seems to be able to stop the killing. The only thing that would stop the killing is the one thing which is totally absent in this whole process, which is any kind of moral position from the United States of America. And I think that's if you like, is the headline at the moment, the extent to which the Americans, who, when Ukraine was invaded by the Russians, talked about how we need rules in the international order. The Americans have cheered as the Israeli state has torn up every single rule. And it's going to be very difficult to actually ensure that human rights are observed around the world because of all of this. So it's very easy, given all of that, and understandable to say that it doesn't matter. But I think that it does matter. And the reason that it does matter is that although these rulings can't be enforced, it really deprives the Israeli state of legitimacy. And if you look at our own situation when we were living under apartheid, what happened is that there was incredible internal resistance, of course, but a major factor, a significant factor, was the fact that people around the world were rightly, morally horrified by what was being done. And we're beginning to see the same thing here. And it's had some practical effects, incidentally. Japan cancelled all sorts of sales as a result of that hearing. A Dutch court instructed the Dutch government not to sell certain guns and bombs to the Israeli state because international law forbade it. So we would all like these rulings to be enforced. We would all like an international rule of law in which people accepted the judgments of the courts. But in a world in which we don't have it, the courts still play a very important role in putting pressure on anybody who violates human rights. And it is putting pressure on the Israeli state, even if we don't see the effects immediately in front of our eyes.
And that's a really sobering thing to note, Prof. The other is, and one of the discussions that come up often in relation to this is the issue around proportionality. And there is the temptation to talk about numbers, but I'll bring those numbers in and then we can talk about the principle of proportionality. Hamas killing over 1,000 people, 1,195, I think was the official number at that music festival and surrounding communities. 251 people were taken hostage, including children. Israel's deadly airstrikes killing more than 40,000 people in Gaza. The number could be higher because of those who might still be buried and unaccounted for. We've seen the mass human displacement and all of the terrible things that have ensued since that. And these numbers, if we think about them and the issue of proportionality, and there's been a lot of discussion about, it shouldn't be measured in the sense of an eye for an eye. When is too much in terms of a legitimate a response? How would you answer the question around, and again, the discussion, the right of a state to defend itself and to respond to an attack? Again, bearing in mind what you said, the history didn't start on October the 7th, but given the situation as it is, how do you respond to the question around proportionality?
Yes. Okay. So let's put that issue aside. The Israeli state is there. Their citizens were attacked. They're allowed to respond to that. That, of course, is the position in international law. But it's not a question of numbers. It's a question of, as you correctly put it, proportionality. And what we mean by that is, if it takes us out of the political realm for a moment, if somebody attacks your home, are you entitled to find out where they live, go and wipe out their entire family and all the neighbors because this person attacked your home? The obvious answer is no, but that is precisely what the Israeli state has done. So it's a basic principle of international law or any other sort of law that if you're attacked by a particular group of people, you are entitled to target that group of people. But there are laws which are supposed to operate, which ensure that you don't inflict pain on people who had nothing to do with the crime you claim that you're responding to. And the Palestinian children have died in huge numbers. They weren't responsible for what happened October the 7th. Hamas, before October the 7th, had the support, we estimate, of about 40% of the Palestinian population. So you are essentially inflicting the most unspeakable horror on thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who didn't even support the organization who you claim you're targeting. And really what is being signaled here, it's very important for us to understand it because we've been through this ourselves, is that Palestinian lives do not matter. That if you can claim, we don't even know whether that's true or not, if you can claim that you're going after one Hamas fighter, then you can wipe out 10 Palestinian families, and that is acceptable. If the world order is going to start condoning that way of thinking, then we're really back to a very dark place in human history, where the only thing that mattered was how many guns and bombs you had, not whether you had right on your side at all. And that's really what's been happening. If there was a civilized response to what had happened, It would have involved going after those people who were allegedly responsible and making sure that civilians were protected. And if in the process you wipe out hospitals, you wipe out schools, you bomb Gaza's university so that it doesn't have one anymore, that can never be even vaguely proportionate to what was done to people on October the 7th.
You spoke about dark days, and it seems like more of those are ahead of us. Prof, Iran's Supreme Leader Sayyid Ali Khamenei gave this Friday sermon, a rare one, this last Friday, saying the resistance in the region wouldn't back down with the martyrdoms and we will win. And this followed the assassination of the leader of the Lebanon-based Hezbollah and their leader Hassan Nasrallah and Revolutionary Guard Commander Abbas Nilfarushan. And this has, again, escalated or played a role in escalating the conflict. Where do you see this all going? I know in the mix are calls for a two-state solution that is riven with complexity as well around the land issue and the land divide. How do you see this playing out, at least in the immediate term?
Okay, well, in the immediate term, I think we are in for a very, very scary period because I mentioned earlier on the missing ingredient here, which explains a lot of what is going on, is the attitude of the American government. You know, the Israeli state didn't start on October the 7th trying to drive the Palestinian people out. It's not the first time it's attacked Lebanon. It's been trying to fight a war with Iran for years now. So all these issues, all these realities are realities we have to deal with. What is different now, the reason we're seeing what we're seeing now, is that the Americans are absolutely not prepared to do anything to hold the Israeli state to account, despite the fact that they provide them with all the guns and the bombs which kill people. Now, I was reading only yesterday, Ronald Reagan was one of the most conservative presidents the Americans ever had. The last time the Israelis invaded Lebanon, Reagan was the president of America, and he called the Israeli ambassador in and he said, this nonsense has got to stop. You can't attack civilians because you are destroying America's image in the Middle East, etc. Biden's not prepared to do that. Biden is not prepared to pick up the phone and say you can't have any more guns and bombs to kill people. And as long as that is the reality, we're looking at an escalation. Now, there's a lot wrong with the Iran. You know, we could talk about what is wrong with the government in Iran and persecuting young women for not wearing the hijab, and those sorts of issues are very real issues. But the fact of the matter here is that Iran really doesn't want a war. Iran would do anything it can to avoid a war, and it's been repeatedly provoked. People are killed in targeted assassinations on Iranian territory. One of the former leaders of Hamas, as we know, was assassinated while he was attending the inauguration of the Iranian president. Iranian scientists are killed, etc. And you get to a stage now where, however much the leadership in Iran would like to avoid conflict, people are saying to them, well, you look weak. You look as though the Israelis can do what you like. And long ago, the Americans should have picked up that phone I'm talking about, saying, there's no mileage here in provoking these people. Nobody wants this regional war. Stop it immediately. And they've never done that. And the result of that is that not only are we facing a crisis in the Middle East, but the whole set of rules which have governed the way in which people behave around the world is under threat because the Americans will not enforce the principles they claim to stand for.
Professor Stephen Friedman, thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us.